Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Ring Avulsion. Alright, if you're a Jimmy Fallon fan, you might remember a few years ago when he took a couple weeks break from the show, and when he came back, he clearly had a hand injury, which he explained was of course the reason for his absence. What had happened is that Jimmy experienced ring avulsion. This horrible thing is an injury that occurs when you're wearing a ring on your finger and it catches on something or somehow creates so much pressure that it severely damages the soft tissue on your finger. And what I mean by severely damages is that it can basically like almost take your finger off without really taking it off, if you know what I mean. Or it can like deglove it, where it's basically like skinned. Either way, it's absolutely terrible. And while Jimmy turned it into a great story, it's definitely not a pretty sight, and a Google search could bring about some pretty gruesome image results. In our number 9 spot today, we have pressure cooker backpacks. This one is gonna be pretty self-explanatory, but someone learned the hard way that the combination of Googling the words pressure cooker bombs and then backpacks is one that no one should dare. In 2013, a Suffolk County man Googled these things and the police later showed up to his house. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a strange combination of things to Google one after the other, but in case it isn't just a coincidence, I'm glad someone is looking out for these kinds of things. In the end, after some investigation, the police were able to determine that there was no threat and that the man was just feeling a little curious that day. Sure, he also learned a very valuable lesson and likely regrets his search history. In our number 8 spot today, we have insider trading. Listen, I don't know anything about trading or stocks or anything like that, but I have learned to never Google the words insider trading in an international account. Someone else made this mistake and ended up paying the consequences. Back in July of 2017, MIT researcher Fei Yan ended up being arrested after he Googled that phrase and then allegedly purchased a bunch of stock. The arresting charges were 3 counts of fraud because federal prosecutors claimed that this stock that was purchased made him $120,000 in illegal profits. Apparently, this guy was using information that was obtained through his spouse's job, which gave illegal insight into certain trading options in order to make these trades, but not before Googling how to avoid law enforcement while doing it, and a bunch of other things that created quite a clear timeline for authorities during the investigation. I guess this search is okay should you not be planning to follow through on the illegal insider trading, but it's probably best just not to Google it at all, just to be as safe as possible. You don't want the police showing up at your door like the other guy. In our number 7 spot today, we have the FDA Defect Levels Handbook. Each year, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they release a report that details something that, honestly, I want to remain blissfully ignorant about. This report details what the maximum levels of different horrible things are that are legally allowed to be in the food that we all eat. What I mean by horrible things is stuff like rodent hairs, maggots, you know, stuff you really don't want in your food at all, because what in the actual world that's horrible? For your own sanity, this is a good search to stay away from, but if you're one of the people who is just way too curious to stay away from it, just remember that I tried to warn you. I mean, personally, I don't want to know how many bugs are allowed to be in my food. I just don't think I could handle it, okay? In our number 6 spot today, we have crocodile. This is the nickname that is used to describe desomorphine, which is a morphine derivative that has some extremely strong effects. This illicit substance, unfortunately, has found its way into the lives of those battling addiction, and it has absolutely wreaked havoc, and the results of its usage are truly terrifying. Unfortunately, much of the production of this substance is illegal, which only leads to an increase in the negative impact it has on the users. The side effects of it often are due to certain toxic substances, which does what is referred to as cooking the skin. Definitely sounds completely horrible. It can also lead to large-scale tissue infection or even damage in the area where it was administered. In fact, the effects of this substance are so bad that many refer to it as the flesh-eating drug. It's safe to say this is definitely something that no one should do, and probably just don't Google it either. In our number 5 spot today, we have the grizzly tapes. Okay, you should never Google this because these videos should never be watched, because this is something that should have never even been recorded. These tapes were the last thing left by Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend. Timothy Treadwell was known as the Grizzly Man. He spent 13 years of his life going in and out of living with bears, which for the most part sounds like the most terrifying thing you could imagine, but for him, he wanted to show the world that you could live live with bears and that they were not an animal to be feared. Well, even though he was able to spend over a decade in their presence, it's this living situation that would eventually lead to his death. Timothy was making a documentary about bears, so naturally he was spending quite a bit of time with them as he filmed. One day, while he was with a grizzly and filming for the doc alongside his girlfriend who was there to help him with the movie, the bear that they were interacting with ended up turning angry, frightened, or something happened that changed its behavior because it went on to kill both members of the couple as the camera rolled on. It's horrible. You can't see too much of what is happening, but you sure can hear it all, which is definitely bad enough. In our number 4 spot today, we have a jigger. When I hear this word, my mind goes to the bartending tool. It's like a shot measurer, okay? After I finish up my work here, I go to work at a restaurant. I see these things every week. They're my friend. If you were interested in perhaps purchasing some new barware, however, be careful with your search when using this term. While the tool is all fine and well, a jigger flea is nightmare fuel. These little insects with the same name as the trusty tool like to burrow into skin where they then lay eggs. Yeah, definitely don't want any images of that coming up in your search. I'm just trying to look out for you, really. Yeah, these small little parasitic guys are only 1 millimeter at first, and when they initially burrow into your skin, it might just feel like a little itchy or whatever, but as their abdomens swell with eggs, pressure can be created, and this pressure could press on nerves or blood vessels, which not only is just awful to think about, but can cause pain that ranges from mild to severe. All in all, just be careful what you Google, because not everything is what it seems. In our number 3 spot today, we have this Steve Irwin stingray video. Like, how random, honestly, but don't Google it. Like, why? This one really gets me right in the feels. Steve Irwin, best known as the crocodile hunter, was famous for his wildlife interactions, but as many of us know, this passion for animals and an interaction with one in particular sadly turned deadly. On September 4th, 2006, Steve was taking part in the production of a documentary series, Ocean's Deadliest. That day, there was some not so great weather, which led to a bit of a pause in the filming. Since nothing was really going on, Steve decided to take a bit of a snorkel into the shallow waters nearby, and they filmed as he did this. He wanted to use the footage in his daughter's TV show, Bindi the Jungle Girl. As they swam in the water that day, Steve approached a stingray that was about 2 meters large, or 6.5 feet, and he approached it from the back in order to try and get some footage of it swimming away. That is not what this stingray did, though. Instead, it propped on its front and started stabbing wildly with its tail as a defensive response. Unfortunately, this caused one of the barb pieces to pierce Steve's heart, which unfortunately led to his death. Despite the crew members administering CPR and rushing him to shore, there was just nothing that could be done. It is believed that this was the only fatality from a stingray that has ever been recorded on video. This is, of course, just tragic, but it also led to a bit of a war against stingrays afterwards. For weeks after his death, stingrays were being found on the beaches of Queensland with their tails cut off. No one is sure if this was done as an act of revenge against stingrays everywhere or what the case was. But yeah, this is one video that don't Google. No one wants to see it. It's just terrible. It's sad. In our number 2 spot today, we have found in fast food. Of course, we have all heard tales of people making stuff up to try and get some kind of free food from their favorite fast food restaurants, but also there are some very real, very disturbing stories out there of stuff people have found, and it is all too searchable. If you searched things people have found in fast food, you'd be met with enough evidence to make you question every fast food meal you have ever and will ever eat in your life. People have found hardware parts, human skin, an entire rat, bugs, hair, and even a whole chicken head. I have a million questions, but I don't even want to attempt a Google search to find out the answers because I'm scared of what I might find out. Reading enough of these harrowing fast food tales is enough to ruin anyone's appetite. In our number 1 spot today, we have mouth larva. Pretty self-explanatory as to why you shouldn't Google this one, and I'm not even sure why anyone would. Maybe in an attempt to find moth larva information and there was a bit of a typo, but even then, maybe just stay away from Googling that as well. Whatever reason you might be thinking of or accidentally typing mouth larva into the search bar, it's best to refrain from because this is one search that will just gross you right out. This search will definitely yield results of humans and other animals that have larvae crawling in between their teeth. Yep, exactly what it sounds like. Mouth larva. larvae and mouths. It's horrible, it's disgusting, and there's not only photos, but there's videos too, in case you wanted to get really weird. Just because you can Google these things does not mean you should. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have botfly removal. Okay, we're starting off strong. Taylor and I used to watch this vet show a lot, and there were a lot of these on there, and let me tell you, it is not for everyone. If you're a fan of things like Dr. Pimple Popper, you might be able to stomach this one, but should that not be up your alley, this is a Google search to definitely stay away from. Botflies are these pesky little flies that like to lay their egg in a host. The host, which can be human or animal, will have to deal with a horrifying fat flesh-eating botfly maggot, which will later need to be removed from your skin. It is horrible. People will go to the doctor or take their animal to the vet because they noticed a strange bump. Little do they know, there is actually an entire maggot living in their skin. It's honestly disgusting. Just the thought of it gives me chills. But there is relief at the end, which is always good. It's honestly just surprising to see the damage that these creatures leave behind. But you'll thank me later if you just don't Google it. It's one image I'll never be able to erase from my mind. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Viktor Sayenko video. Viktor is just one part of a group that is responsible for a string of in Ukraine that took place in June and July of 2007. In the end, he was charged with 29 separate incidents, 21 of which were and the rest were incidents where the victims thankfully survived the horrendous attacks. Aside from just how extremely terrible this entire thing is, the case gained a certain notoriety because of the fact that there was actually a recording of one of these crimes that was leaked and found its way onto the internet. That is because the people committing these acts had intended to sell the videos of them being done, which is thought to have been the biggest motivation for the crimes. In the end, Viktor was found guilty of all of these crimes and is currently serving a life sentence, but that video still lurks out there unfortunately on the internet, and I think it definitely goes without saying that this is something that is just not safe for life. In our number 8 spot today, we have pillows under a microscope. This one may seem a little specific, but just you wait. Pillows are the thing we rest our weary heads on every night to get our 8 hours. Who am I kidding? Most of us are getting what? 4? Regardless of whoever sleeps the most or the least, our pillows all are going to be looking a little similar. The pillow seems so inviting, so warm, so cozy, it's a safe place, right? Wrong. You get up close to that thing, view it under a microscope, and you reveal all the other things that also like to rest their little heads on it. Under a microscope, the common house dust mites that lurk on many of our pillows become alarmingly visible, and as we speak, there's probably more than you'd like to know living on yours. These guys like to live on your pillow because their favorite food is your dead skin cells. Yeah. It's disgusting. I'd appreciate it if they could at least do something to alleviate nightmares, but no, they just are the nightmare. In our number 7 spot today, we have feeding time at an eel farm. One day, on Reddit, I came across a video that was titled Feeding Time at an Eel Farm, which I mean is exactly what the video is, but man, I was not expecting it to look like this. As soon as they drop the food in, a bunch of freaky little water snakes immediately start jumping at it. But like, when I say a bunch, it's so much more than I could have ever expected. There is something about this video that really feeds into the whole fear of the ocean thing, and while this video is definitely oddly terrifying, it's also important to note the danger of these eel farms, especially for the kinds of eels that are endemic to an area, those that are endangered, or both. Eels are long-living creatures who only breed once, and they don't do it in captivity. When most of a generation of eels are caught, it proves to be a really large problem in terms of population. In our number 6 spot today, we have zombie ants. These infected creatures are so horrifying to me, they honestly are like nightmare fuel. There is a type of insect pathogenic fungus that is commonly found in tropical forest ecosystems. This fungus infects a certain kind of ant, and once infected, this ant basically turns into a zombie. Good news is, the ant doesn't suddenly go around eating others of its kind, but it is still being controlled and manipulated by this fungus. The ant will leave their nest and usual trails and head for the forest floor, which has better conditions for fungal growth. From here, the ant will then bite and attach itself to the major vein on a leaf, and basically they just stay there until they die, which is usually around 4 to 10 days. During these days, the fungus will basically start to sprout out of the ant's head, so was to be prepared to infect the next unsuspecting creature, and that is what Google will show you awful images of. Maybe it's because I hate bugs so much that this one disturbs me, but I don't know. It's just really unsettling. I get like Last of Us vibes from this one. In our number 5 spot today, we have lamprey eye disease. I'll be totally honest and upfront with you. This is something that is not real and instead was a classic internet hoax, but that doesn't mean it wasn't based on a real thing, and it also doesn't mean that the very unsettling photoshopped photos of it aren't completely upsetting imagery. Basically, a lamprey is a real water-bound parasite fish that has ancient lineage here on Earth, and they also have the creepiest looking head in the world. So the people of the internet decided to create and spread news of this fake disease inspired by the real creature's weird head, and thus lamprey disease was born. And in my opinion, lamprey eye disease was the worst of all of the lamprey options. It's exactly what it sounds like, and basically a search of lamprey eye disease will reveal images of a person whose eye has been photoshopped to appear like the head of that parasite. While I can rest easy knowing I'll never experience this in real life, there are some images that just should never exist, whether photoshopped or not. In our number 4 spot today, we have the 80s Kleenex commercial. There is a legend that suggests there is actually a curse surrounding this really weird and creepy Kleenex commercial that aired in the 80s. The commercial itself is very strange, and it depicts some sort of ogre child thing being sung to by a woman who is acting really strangely, and the song she is singing is also perfectly fit for a horror movie. The ad was quickly pulled from the air as it had people calling in explaining that they were really creeped out by it, but of course the internet took hold of it beforehand. So that creepy looking child I mentioned before, well, many people believe that it resembles an Oni demon. There are of course major consequences for looking at a demon, which is exactly what this urban legend surrounds. Basically, legend goes that the crew who worked in this commercial production ended up all passing away after working on the commercial, all in really mysterious ways, which people of course believe is due to the demon on set. All in all, I think these haunting tales are enough to have me staying away from Googling it any further. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Island of the Dolls. The Island of the Dolls is basically exactly what it sounds like, and while it is exceptionally creepy to look at, the story behind it is even more disturbing. The island sits in the canals south of Mexico City and is the home of many absolutely terrifying and mutilated dolls. Even in the daylight, dolls look creepy with their missing limbs and heads and weird beady eyes, but at nighttime, the island is nightmare fuel. The story behind this island is very tragic. It starts off with the only person on the island, Don Julian Santana, finding a body. He was of course absolutely beside himself over this gruesome discovery, and shortly after he saw a doll floating by in the water. He strung the doll up in a tree in order to appease her soul and to protect the island from evil. While this is an extremely dark story and the dolls are very creepy, I think we can all certainly understand why the dolls definitely needed to stay there. In our number 2 spot today, we have thrush. If you were searching this term looking for a plump, soft plumaged, small to medium sized bird, you might want to be a little more specific. This is because just the general term might have Google confusing your harmless bird interest for something else. Thrush is also the term used to describe a certain infection caused by a yeast which is called Candida. Candida lives on and in all of us, but sometimes there can be a change that causes it to multiply, and this can cause an infection and an overgrowth. Thrush is seen when the fungal growth takes over the mouth, throat, or esophagus, and while this is not something that is uncommon at all, it definitely can be a bit surprising when you expected a cute little bird and instead got images of someone's esophagus. This is one Google search that you definitely need to be clear about what you're searching for, because who knows what results might show up. In our number 1 spot today, we have your symptoms. It really is the classic tale. You start having symptoms, whether common ones or not, and you take to the search bar to input those symptoms, hoping for some kind of an answer or perhaps a home remedy, and boom, you are met with the news. Your symptoms could only mean one thing: a rare terminal illness. I swear, according to Google, that is the answer every time, and to be honest, this could be quite dangerous in a multitude of ways. Firstly, the panic. It's always best not to send yourself into a downward spiral for no reason, and it is definitely true that a Google search is not the same as a real doctor visit. Now, I totally know that a doctor visit isn't always accessible to everyone, and sometimes we do have to rely on a bit of our own research to carry us through, but be wary of the results. Don't get too spooked at what you see come back, but if you do happen to get worried, it's always good to get a second opinion when you can. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the inside of your stomach. I'm not entirely sure why anyone would want to Google this, but if you're curious about some of your intestinal anatomy, you perhaps are looking for a nicely colored diagram to learn more about what's going on in your own body, but unfortunately, that's not all that comes up on one of these searches. Googling the inside of your stomach will have some image results of, well, the inside of your stomach. What did you think? It's exactly what you asked for, but let me be clear, that is not a sight for everybody. Looking at these images would definitely make quite a few of us sick to our stomachs, unless you're a medical student or a professional, or just know that you can handle the graphic images that might pop up on the screen. This is definitely a search that should just stay out of your history. In our number 9 spot today, we have crime scene photos. There unfortunately are many crime scene photos on the internet that are just one simple search away, but today we are talking about just one, and that is the Nikki Katsouras crash scene photos. In October of 2006, Nikki was 18 and driving her father's Porsche in Lake Forest in California when she unfortunately lost control of the vehicle and crashed. The crash is said to have been extremely gruesome, and like any crime scene, photos were taken of it. Unfortunately, these photos did end up getting leaked through emails, and from there they were posted to and spread on the internet. It has become abundantly clear that Nikki's family does not want people looking at these photos, so other than the fact that something like this is just not safe for life, I think they are making a perfectly reasonable request that definitely should be respected where possible. All this to say, I didn't and won't be Googling any of these photos. In our number 8 spot today, we have the brain-eating amoeba. Naegleria fowleri is more commonly known as the brain-eating amoeba for a pretty fair reason, and this is one of those things that once you learn about it, it can kind of send you down a rabbit hole. Alright, we've all been there. This parasite is single-celled and thrives in warm bodies of water. It can enter the human body when water that contains the amoeba enters the nose. It will then travel from there via the olfactory nerves, and within a few days, symptoms will begin to present themselves. The parasite can cause a brain infection known as meningoencephalitis, which can cause severe brain inflammation. How was that for a one-time, just one shot? Pretty impressive. That's a big word. Symptoms will start with a fever, a headache, some nausea, and vomiting, and a stiff neck. Eventually though, the symptoms will progress into lack of attention, loss of balance, seizures, hallucinations. The parasite will most likely put the host into a coma, and almost 100% of the people who have been infected have lost their lives. This is all to say, this terrifying parasite is one that I would refrain from Googling unless you just want to be totally freaked out about its existence. I know I just told you about it, but don't Google, because it only gets worse from here. In our number 7 spot today, we have the dark web. Just one of those really self-explanatory things. The dark web has stuff on it that we don't even want to begin to think about. And not only this, but just casually trying to access the dark web is likely to have you being added to some kind of internet watch list somewhere. A search for the dark web might reveal some odd conspiracy theories that might get you roped in. It might show you some horrific content you definitely don't want to see, or you might even see yourself getting hacked or a virus, or who knows, any of the other disgusting stuff that lurks on the dark corners of the internet. Who am I kidding? I feel like the dark web takes up more space on the internet than I want to know. All I'm saying is, hi, how are you? Let's all stay on this side of the internet, the fun, nice side, where we talk about creepy stuff, but we don't do creepy stuff. Know what I'm saying? In our number 6 spot today, we have calculus bridge. At first I thought this was just like a terrifying math problem or something, but as it turns out, it really is just a dentist's nightmare. In the dental world, the word calculus means something very different. Basically, what dental calculus is, when you don't properly brush or floss dental plaque away, it can combine with the minerals that are in your saliva and eventually turn into calculus. While regular plaque can be brushed away, you definitely need professional help in order to get rid of calculus. Now, Now, calculus bridge is like a step up from regular calculus. According to Doctor of Dental Surgery Gary Schlotterer, quote, a calculus bridge occurs when tartar or calculus builds up so much that it connects with the adjacent teeth and forms a solid bridge of deposits. You can visually see this bridge due to its brown or tan color along the edge of the teeth by the gum line, but of course, when we Google this term, images is only going to show us some of the most severe cases, which can see the bridge extending into the gum line or further along the surface of the teeth. Unless you're particularly interested in dental hygienics, this might be a good search to just stay away from. In our number 5 spot today, we have a chicken laying an egg. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I'm fairly certain it was the egg. We can discuss that all later, because what we are discussing right now is why you should never Google a chicken laying an egg. I feel like this is hopefully pretty self-explanatory, but it's definitely a strange sight. You'd be surprised how much chicken egg laying content there is out there though. I mean, one of the top results when I searched this was a YouTube video called "Chicken laying an egg!" exclamation point, and then in parentheses, close-up 3, which I think insinuates a close-up 2 and 1, and I'm just gonna say it. Who needs 3 separate parts of close-up shots? That's weird. Anyway, some things I think are better left to the imagination, and some are best just not being thought of at all. And I think this counts as one of those. In our number 4 spot today, we have Ed Gein's house. Ed Gein was an absolute monster and is the basis for many horror movies today because of how horrifying his crimes were. Inside of his home, authorities found different household items that were made out of body parts, some from the victims of his crimes and some from the graves he would go and search and snatch from. There are some photos circulating the incident that are more tame, but some of them show just a drop of the horrors that lay inside of the home. For a while, for some unknown reasons, it was thought that they might use this house as a tourist attraction, but thankfully the house ended up burning down, and honestly I feel truly glad that it doesn't exist anymore. Save yourself the real life nightmare and just refrain from googling anything to do with Ed Gein, unless you want to see lamps made out of humans. In our number 3 spot today, we have historical Halloween costumes. In this day and age, when Halloween time comes around, we see all types of costumes. We see a few spooky, scary ones, but for the most part we see princesses, or fairies, or basketball players, or some sort of pop culture reference. But back in the day, Halloween was a terrifying time. And I'm not saying that because people dressed as these elaborate, scary creatures. I just mean the absolute scraps that people had to throw together to make a Halloween mask are truly scarier than any creature I could ever come up with. Googling Halloween costumes from history will bring up photos showing a nice little family as they're ready to celebrate the spookiest day of the year, but their costumes are full on terror-inducing. It just gives me the Strangers vibes. It's very unsettling. In our number 2 spot today, we have the wet koala. I love little koala bears. They're cute, they're always just chillin'. I feel like most people enjoy a nice photo of a koala, alright, brighten your day a bit. But for some strange reason, when you Google wet koala, everything changes. Wet koala searches bring back results of koalas that appear to be drenched in some sort of water, but for some reason, in all of these photos, the demeanor of the koala has changed. These wet koalas are not the nice, kind, cuddly, adorable ones I thought I knew, and instead are these angry, menacing, teeth-bearing ones that I really never expected to see. Okay, as it turns out, the teeth-bearing one is actually all thanks to Photoshop, but I still stand by my original point. That Photoshop job really made me think of koalas in a different light, and the original photos they used to Photoshop still don't have the koalas looking too happy. Maybe they just aren't fans of the rain, I don't know. In our number 1 spot today, we have eyelashes. In the last part of this video series, we talked about Googling your pillow under a microscope, and now we are talking about Googling your eyelashes under a microscope. Our eyelashes help keep our eyes clean, and the stray ones give us wishes, and they seem like harmless, little easygoing hairs, right? Well, turns out when we go a little closer, our eyelashes are the home to a disgusting little secret. The lashes aren't really the problem, the more concerning thing is the creatures that call them home. These creatures, called demodex, are mites that live on everyone's eyelashes. They, like the pillow bugs, feed off of dead skin cells as well as the oils that collect in the follicles. Okay, are you ready for the worst part? I know, it's crazy that we aren't even past it yet, but here we go. At nighttime, while you're sleeping, these guys come out of your eyelashes and head onto other regions of your face, and this is where they breed, okay? They then return to your lash follicles to lay up to 25 eggs. Yeah, I don't know. I woke up like just a couple hours ago and I'm still trying to recover from what just happened to me. Alright? I don't like it. I don't like it. Wash your face, wash your eyelashes, and get out of here. Alright? That's it. We're done. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have guinea worm disease. This is a neglected tropical disease that is caused by a parasite, and it really is just terrible. This disease unfortunately affects poor communities, especially in remote areas of the world that do not have water that is safe to drink. Basically, what happens with this disease is a person will become infected after drinking water containing the water fleas that are infected with the larva of the guinea worm. That already sounds terrible to me, but it does get worse. The worms will then penetrate the digestive tract and stay here while they grow to size. Okay, even worse. But it keeps going. About a year later, these horrible creatures will then migrate to a spot where they want to exit, normally somewhere on a lower limb. From here, they will create a very painful blister on the skin, which will eventually burst into an excruciatingly painful open wound. From here, the real nightmare starts, because not only is the pain terrible, but it will last for several weeks, while a long, sometimes up to 1 meter, string-like worm will slowly crawl out of this wound. It honestly makes me sick thinking about it. This process can have a person totally unable to really move for around 3 to 10 weeks it takes for the worm to leave the body. This is complete nightmare fuel. At this point, there isn't a treatment or prevention for this disease other than having access to safe water, of course, which should be a reality for every human. In good news, however, the number of cases of this has dropped drastically since the mid-1980s, and hopefully it could be on its way to eradication. All in all, unless you want a complete horror show and some awful imagery burned into your brain forever, maybe skip the Google search of this one. Alright, I told you what you need to know. In our number 9 spot today, we have locked-in syndrome. We've all heard of sleep paralysis, but what if I told you that there was a worse, scarier version of it? Locked-in syndrome is like sleep paralysis, but the awake version. It's a condition which renders the patient completely unable to move, aside from vertical eye movements and blinking. The patient is completely conscious and aware of what is happening, and able to communicate with eye movements, but everything else is, well, locked in. The cause of this is due to damage in the lower brain and brain stem with no damage to the upper parts. This can happen from things like poisoning, a brain stem stroke, a traumatic brain injury, or a lesion of the brain stem, as well as many other factors. The scariest thing, however, is that there is an even worse version called total locked-in syndrome, where the patient isn't even able to move their eyes. Unfortunately, most people who experience this never have any significant motor function return, as there really isn't a cure. There have been people who have made a spontaneous full recovery though, so there certainly is hope. But aside from this hope, learning about this sent me down a total rabbit hole of similar conditions I had no idea about. I don't know how people get through medical school, learning about the multitude of horrifying things that could potentially happen to a person. In our number 8 spot today, we have trypophobia. This word was really coined or created back in 2005 when someone posted about it on an online forum, and although it is not an officially recognized disorder, it is possible to be diagnosed as a specific phobia in extreme cases, and it's a thing that many of us experience on some level. Basically, Wikipedia describes trypophobia as, quote, an aversion to the sight of irregular patterns or clusters of small holes or bumps. This means that a Google search of the word will have all of the worst images for someone experiencing trypophobia popping up right at the top. It's honestly so strange how something like this could make such a large number of people horrifically uncomfortable, but alas, it really does. Scientists aren't quite sure how trypophobia really developed. There's quite a limited understanding of it due to limited research, but right now the leading theory is that it is possible that it could be a bit of an evolutionary revulsion, where we as humans associate this sort of imagery with disease or poison or other danger. Well, that is pretty fascinating. I'm just warning you. The results could be nauseating. I'm like mid-level trypophobic. I feel like I experience mild discomfort seeing these images, but I know for some people it's full-blown horror. If you're a trypophobe though, you might want to skip this next point. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Suriname toad birth. Okay, so these little toads, Suriname toads, are these flat, leaf-looking amphibians from South America, and they find their home in the rainforests of the area. That is all fine. Frogs are kinda cute. That is, until it's time for these guys to reproduce. That is because during mating season, the males will deposit dozens of fertilized eggs onto the females' backs. Okay, a little unusual, not too bad. Well, until that female's skin starts to grow around these eggs like bubble wrap to keep them safe. For the next few months, the eggs develop in these little special enclosures, but once it's time for birth is where the real horror starts. These little guys eventually just erupt from the back of the mom. It's just a horrifying birthing experience. And if you have trypophobia, like we just talked about, then this is truly a worst nightmare. To anyone, this is a pretty disgusting sight, but that fear will only heighten the dramatics of this one. There are plenty of videos of this birthing process all over the internet, and while some of these videos definitely went viral, it's for all of the wrong reasons. In our number 6 spot today, we have the seahorse birth. Speaking of animals giving birth in strange ways, let's talk about the reasons why you should never Google a seahorse giving birth. I can't be the only one who is highly uncomfortable by the sight, but I'm not entirely sure why I don't like it. Seahorses are pretty cool, they're pretty cute, and generally I personally don't have a problem with them. That is, until they start shooting out kids by the dozen. There aren't many birthing processes that look like it's a fun, nice time, but this one really just looks stressful. An interesting thing about seahorse reproduction is that the males of this species are actually responsible for carrying the children. Seahorse fathers incubate their developing embryos in a pouch located on their tail. Their tail basically serves as the equivalent of a female uterus seen in mammals. When birthing time rolls around, these fathers are giving birth by basically shooting these babies out of the tail, but there's thousands of them. It looks like the seahorse is having contractions or maybe something similar. Definitely not a scientist, but with every contraction, thousands of tiny little baby seahorses pop out, and while the miracle of life is a beautiful process, it also leaves me feeling really uncomfortable. Super happy for the new dad and all, just don't want to be flooded with seahorse birthing videos, personally. In our number 5 spot today, we have epidermolysis bullosa. With every part of this series, I learn about one more thing I didn't know I needed to be afraid of, and this is one of those things. This skin condition is quite a rare one, and it is one that affects the skin. It causes the skin to be extremely fragile and often blistering. These blisters can occur from the simplest things like minor injuries, even from just rubbing or scratching. There are even some more severe cases where this blistering can occur inside of the body, like on the inside of the mouth or even the inside of the stomach, which sounds so awful. This is something that is inherited, and while you normally can tell soon after birth, sometimes symptoms don't present themselves until teenage or young adult years. Symptoms include things like fragile skin that blisters easily, especially on the palms and feet, nails that are thick or unformed, scalp blistering and hair loss, skin that looks thin, and dental problems such as tooth decay. Unfortunately, there is not a cure for this skin condition, and treatment just focuses on healing present blisters and trying to prevent new ones. All in all, this sounds like a really painful thing for those who have to deal with it, and googling this term will have some really graphic and sometimes even gory photos coming up, which is exactly why it's a term that is best to stay away from when it comes to the search bar. Being informed is great. Seeing horrifying images, well, less great, for sure. In our number 4 spot today, we have the wandering black hole. The James Webb Telescope is one of the most exciting space tools of all time, and it has already revealed some incredible information and photos to us in its debut year. But in order to fully feel how incredible these things are, we have to remember where we came from. The James Webb was preceded by the infamous Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble walked so James Webb could run. Since its launch into low Earth orbit in the 1990s, this space telescope has been delivering us amazing space discoveries, and this one is a bit of a frightening one. Back in 2017, the Hubble located a black hole, which is already frightening, but this one was peculiar. That is because they found out that this one was being pulled or manipulated by gravitational waves. Basically what this means is that at some point, this black hole is going to escape its own galaxy and begin roaming the universe. Black holes are bad enough. I don't want them to start wandering around. Turns out, however, that this really is a possibility, and it's happened in more than this one instance. Googling these wandering black holes is sure to send anyone into a doomsday spin. The good news, however, is that despite this black hole weighing approximately the same as 1 billion suns as it flies through space at 5 million miles per hour, it's estimated to be about 8 billion light years from Earth, so at this point, we're pretty safe. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Amazonian giant centipede. These centipedes are the largest centipede species in the world, with the ability to grow over a foot. These gross things will prey on basically anything they can, which includes other large insects, spiders, millipedes, scorpions, even tarantulas. But because they're so huge, it also includes small lizards, frogs, snakes, mice, and even bats. They have crazy hunting techniques for the largest of their prey, and have been known to climb on the ceiling of caves in order to get the bats, which is both incredible and very scary. These things are also venomous, and while it hasn't been a common occurrence for humans to die from a bite, there is one recorded incident that took place in 2014. This incident happened in Venezuela, and a person passed away after being bitten by one of these giant centipedes after it had hidden itself in an empty soda can. There are a lot of dangerous things crawling around on the forest floor of the Amazon, but this one might take the cake on the most disgusting looking. In our number 2 spot today, we have invisible fire. A lot of these horrible searches are horrible because of the images that the search will reveal, but for this one, the issue with it is the fact that you can't see it. Invisible fires are actually ethanol fires. These are the fires that are created by alcohol, even the kinds we drink, and motor fuel as well, which is why they can be quite an issue for race car drivers and crews. Ethanol burns blue and smokeless, but these blue flames can be virtually invisible to the naked eye. This provides an incredibly huge obstacle, obviously. We now know how dangerous and deadly fires can be, so how do we fight something that is dangerous and deadly but that we can't see? It truly is one of those things that upon learning about, I suddenly developed some sort of an irrational fear over it. And that one scene in Talladega Nights makes a lot more sense now. In our number 1 spot today, we have alien hand syndrome. If someone told me about this before I made this list, I would have thought that they were trying to play like a silly little trick on me, but this one really does exist. Alien hand syndrome is an eerie phenomenon that occurs when a person suddenly does not have control over their hand or any limb anymore. The hand will begin acting like it has a mind of its own, which truly is a terrifying thought. Sometimes people will find themselves in a situation where they're forced to keep the alien hand under control with a hand they thankfully still have control over, so as to ensure they don't harm themselves or anyone else. The most common factor regarding this syndrome is that the primary motor cortex, which controls the hand movement, is isolated from the premotor cortex influences, but it still remains intact and able to execute movements. All in all, this isn't like the deadliest one on this list, but it certainly is very, very creepy, and unless you want to be incredibly freaked out, I would potentially refrain from Googling it.